Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience as we made sure that we were all connected for this closing session of our first day of the conference. Thanks for joining us for this bonus session at the end of the day, Pennsylvania Special Education Update, a year in review. This session is not designed for credit, so you don't need to worry about waiting for a code at the end. This is just a freebie here. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenters for this session. We have with us the Bureau of Special Education Director, Ms. Carole Clancy, and our BSE Assistant Director, Ms. Amy Pastoric. Welcome, Amy and Carole.
Thank you. Thank you for joining this afternoon. There has been a significant amount of guidance to come out from the Bureau this year, so we just wanted to take some time today to summarize the guidance, clarify a few points that are resonating from the field, and highlight an upcoming initiative. We will not go over the guidance thoroughly. We're just going to highlight some of the key components or any updates have happened since they've been published. At the end of the PowerPoint, there are links to all of the guidance we're going to speak to today to make it easier for you to access. Pat will post the PowerPoint when time permits. But for now, you can find the guidance on the Bureau of Special Education webpage. We may have time for questions at the end, so you may put them in the chat. If we do not have time for questions, we will review all of them, and if there are common themes, we will add them to the future guidance for clarity. Go ahead, Amy.
All right. And welcome, everybody. We appreciate you having you being with us this afternoon. So go ahead, Carole, you can get started.
Absolutely. So here's a list of some of the initial guidance that came out from the field when we last spring. When COVID first began, there was a lot of concerns around virtual assessments. Initially, the Bureau indicated a hard no to virtual assessments, but we then did a revision to loosen the language a bit to allow the decision to be at the discretion of the LEA, just reminding the LEAs that they needed to ensure the reliability and the validity of the assessments. The current message from the Bureau regarding evaluations is they need to be a priority. We need to ensure that any of the delayed assessments from the school closures, everything is being completed to ensure that students are not delayed in receiving services. We have heard a number of schools that have been in full remote, but have set up assessment centers to complied with the health and safety guidelines. We are just emphasizing immensely the need to get the assessments done so we are not delaying services to students. BSE also posted an annotated IEP to reflect how services could be reflected in this fluid situation. The annotated IEP is posted on the Patent website. The goal was to ensure that regardless of the learning model of the LEA, the students' IEPs would reflect how FAPE would be delivered during that time. As said many times, this was an uncertain time this year. As a result, there were many random, numerous questions that came into the field on how to navigate special education during the pandemic. As a result, there was an array of question and answers on the BSE website for your reference. We would recommend you review them at your leisure if you're unsure of a particular nuance in the field right now. We have a very short additional Q&A coming out in the near future. It will address questions around the Act 26 question revisions, mediation, FIDS in private schools, attendance and truancy. So look for that in the near future. Amy, did you want to talk about the state assessments?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Carole. So as most of you know, and if you don't, last week, the U.S. Department of Education sent a letter to states providing certain flexibilities. PDE responded the next day with an open letter to the field and asking for feedback. One of the flexibilities that Pennsylvania intends to maximize is to extend the testing windows to provide more opportunity for students to participate in assessments this year. As of right now, we expect that the PSSA and Keystones will be able to be administered through September. We are currently working with PASA and AEDY, each of those vendors, to determine a date for a window extension. I'll talk a little bit more about PASA later in the presentation, some more details with administration for our most significant learners.
Okay, so COVID compensatory services was a concept born out of the pandemic. The intent was a means for LEAs to proactively address the potential loss of skills or lack of meaningful progress as a result of the school closures or the extended alternate learning models. This has been a complex situation. The intention of CCS, COVID compensatory services, was that schools would be open in a traditional sense last fall, and that would have made the process and the decisions consistent moving forward. However, we all know that that was not the case. So as a result, local education agencies needed to make individual decisions based on their unique circumstance of the transmission rate and their learning models to determine when and how they were going to do the CCS determinations. We did revise our guidance once we realized that school was not going to open the way we had planned in the fall, and we removed the hard cutoff timelines of November. We loosened the timelines a bit to indicate that the process should be completed no later than 3 months after school resumes normal operations. This was an effort to provide the flexibilities to the districts across the Commonwealth that all were in different points regarding due to the transmission rate. However, it does raise the question often regarding what does normal operations mean? The term normal operations comes directly from the spring 2020 USDE guidance, which indicated that all students with disabilities should be reviewed to determine a need for compensatory services when schools resume normal operations. As a result, BSE just leaned on that language, and we will be holding off on defining normal operations until we review guidance coming out from OSEP in the near future. We are expecting OSEP to provide some guidance regarding compensatory services in the future, so we'd like to delay the definition until we see if they choose to define normal operations. As a result, LEAs should be conducting the CCS determinations process based on their unique circumstance and the needs of the students. A few main points regarding this process. We just want to remind the field. This is an IEP team decision based on the data collection. We have consistently communicated to the field to involve the parents in the decision-making process. Collaboration has been a key mantra of the Bureau, so we continue to emphasize involving your parents and guardians in the review of the data and the decision-making process. Finally, we need to remind the field that CCS services are different than extended school year services. Extended school year existed prior to the pandemic. There were many students eligible for extended school year prior to the pandemic that continue to be in need of extended school year services. However, there could be students eligible for extended school year services and also in need of COVID compensatory services. And it's important to recognize that and plan for that. Most recently, there have been a number of conversations coming out of the Bureau involving an increased attention to the attendance and truancy concerns of students with disabilities. During the pandemic, we do have students with disabilities exhibiting poor attendance habits. And we are reminding the field that if a student with a disability is truant or chronically absent, the school should convene the student's IEP team to determine whether revisions to the student's IEP are necessary or appropriate. We need to proactively address our students' lack of engagement. Patton is developing a collection of re-engagement strategies to provide support to the LEAs. During this time, we are reminding teams to come together to discuss what supports and services or engagement strategies could be part of the student's IEP to help support their re-engagement or attendance. Next slide.
So one of the things that we wanted to talk about this afternoon was really kind of looking at a high level, some of the shifts we've made due to the pandemic. We recognized early on in March that we were going to go beyond those initial 2 weeks, right? So one of the things that we did early on was pivot our CMCI efforts. We worked with some stakeholders, with an internal group within the Bureau, and we quickly assembled a virtual cyclical monitoring process that we are still engaging in at this time. This year, we are working with about 125 LEAs through the virtual monitoring process. And what I would like to share with the field is there's been some key positives that have been a result of this updated and revised process. We stayed true to all of those pieces of traditional cyclical monitoring, but now we're just doing much of it in a virtual environment. One of the takeaways has been the dashboard that pre-populates data for districts to look at for their FSA purposes. The other piece that we announced here in, I believe that was December, was an extension to the special education plan. This was specific to phase 3 schools. We recognize that we were rolling out a new system that we're very excited about. That training will be delivered in April for the Future Ready system that we will now be utilizing. It's much more streamlined for school districts, and then intermediate units will be part of that process as well. But we also recognized as a Bureau that planning long-term in a pandemic it is difficult and next to impossible. So we gave those phase 3 schools an extra year. The other thing that we focused on as a group was electronic procedures. We put out guidance specific to e-signatures, and a lot of schools are moving in that direction. We put our complaint process online so that everybody could have equal access to that. More recently, our team worked on online paraprofessional credentials. So those now, they used to be paper pencil, and now they can come into the Bureau electronically, and we can work with those paraprofessionals that are seeking those credentials. Do you want to talk about the last 2 bullet points, Carole?
Sure. There was a series of funds that came out from the Bureau to support the students with disabilities during the pandemic. We provided additional funds to LEAs through the intermediate units where they could purchase supports for students with complex needs. Districts chose to support, purchase unique learning systems, and the data from that statewide implementation was exceptional. Pennsylvania has received accolades from the entity, from ULS, based on the significant success of the implementation across the Commonwealth in spite of being in a pandemic. We also had the privilege, the support from the governor's office, who provided additional funds to students with disabilities across the Commonwealth, and that supported the special education impact mitigation grants to support LEAs to either enhance the remote services for students with complex needs, or to support the implementation of a systemic approach to COVID compensatory services. And those funds are available into the start of next school year. Another positive outcome of the pandemic is the strengthening of our collaboration across Pennsylvania and among our stakeholder groups. Early on, we made the commitment to be collaborative and connected to support students with disabilities. We met regularly to share information so that the Bureau was aware of the concerns in the field, and the stakeholder groups were aware of the supports the Bureau was providing. It is a great partnership. We firmly believe that we are supported across Pennsylvania by our stakeholder groups in an effort to ensure that students with disabilities are at the center of all of our decisions. We are very grateful for the collaborative spirit across Pennsylvania. Next slide. We hope by now you certainly are aware of all the additional resources on the Patent website. There has been synchronous coaching supports for a variety of initiatives, behavior, autism, the dyslexia expansion, and many other supports. There is an array of supports around students with complex needs, and they will still be there. Many of the supports are good for beyond the pandemic, so they'll be up there and available for you to access in the future. Next slide. We are giving top-level brief explanations of the guidance from the year, but we want to remind you of the numerous webinars and trainings that are available for you to look at if you would like even more depth explanation. There was a Peel webinar I did in partnership that had a thorough explanation of the COVID compensatory services. There was just so many options for short webinars for trainings available. We want to make sure that you're aware of them, as well as the supports that are available for families. Under the family engagement section of the patent website, there is a lot of resources, either in documentation or videos or trainings for parents as well. Next slide.
So one of the things that we also wanted to just take a moment and highlight is the governor's commitment for special education, and naming 2 months in October of 2020, Down Syndrome Awareness Month, and March of 2021, Brain Injury Awareness Month. We have been supported, and we really appreciate that. And we just want to share this information with the field. You can celebrate these months in your schools if you so choose, but it's really reaffirming to the work that we're all doing.
So before I get into the Act 26, there were a couple questions I wanted to respond to. There were concerns with having to log on late today and missing some of the information at the beginning of our presentation. So the presentation is being recorded. It will be posted. Our PowerPoint will also be posted. So don't worry if you missed the beginning of the presentation. The information will be available at a later time. Okay, on to Act 26 questions. The Act 26 questions were revised due to misunderstanding of the intent between those that created the questions and the interpretation in the educational field. We revised the questions with the intention that they would be collected off of the documents as other data points are collected. Vendors, however, have developed how they will collect the answers to the responses, but the intent was to eliminate the manual data entry and have the answers be collected directly off of the IEP forms. The questions are as follows. Does the student have a transition plan as part of the IEP? As soon as a transition plan is opened up in the IEP, we would anticipate that the answer to that question would be yes. Number 2, does the student have an outcome goal of competitive integrated employment? If the student has an outcome goal of competitive integrative employment on the short term or the long term following post-secondary education, that answer would be yes. The only time that answer would be no is if the goal of the student is supported employment or anything more restrictive. For question 3 and 4 regarding job training or paid work experience in an integrated setting, once the student participates in those activities in school, whether it's their freshman year, their sophomore year, or their junior year, it will remain a yes on the collection, even if they do not do it in the current year. So in their sophomore year, if they participate, they receive job training services or they participate in a paid work experience in an integrated setting, but in their junior year, they do not, that answer would still be a yes. I just want to remind you of the intention of the collections. These collections are for OVR, for the measurement of the outcomes of students with disabilities. And what we're trying to look at is what activities do students participate in before graduation that correlate or lead to employment in a competitive integrated setting post high school. So it's more about, did these activities occur at some point, opposed to how often did they occur? Number 5 is, was the student employed in a competitive integrated setting prior to graduating high school? The intention was that this would be collected off of the summary of performance. Every student that exits need to have a summary of academic and functional performance completed. We recommended adding a checkbox to that document, yes or no, just for a simple collection. And vendors might be working on that for the near future since it was a mid-year change. It's important to know that if you only need to respond to that in a yes at the point of exiting, Prior to that, we would expect prior to graduation, we would expect question 5 to be no until that exiting year. Another point to remember is that these are not compliance-driven questions. There has been concerns regarding what if the IEP team thinks they're going to be employed, but then something happens. They think they're going to participate in job training services, but then it changes. What's going to happen to the collection? These are not compliance-based questions. We recognize things are going to change from year to year as IEPs and services do. This is just what is happening during that snapshot when it's collected in July. Next slide, Amy. So this slide just goes over some of the details and some of the questions that came up from the field. When is this submission? This submission is the July submission. For number 3, the question was, are the paid work experience only, directed by the school, or could it be one of the activities they participate with the OVR pre-ETS program? Any time the student participates in paid work experience would count in that question, regardless of if it's a school-based program or supported through OVR. Okay, go ahead, Amy.
Sorry, I'm clicking and looking at chat, and anybody who's used to presenting virtually knows there's a lot of back and forth there. So just wanted to touch base on AEDY program monitoring. That was also something that kind of moved fast and furious there from May 2019 to 2020. And that was a result of the settlement agreement between PDE and the Department of Justice. So in January 2020, AEDY program monitoring commenced. We worked collaboratively with the Patent AEDY team and our Bureau of Special Education Advisors. And really the goal of that monitoring is very similar to our CMCI process. We are working with AEDY programs to help their practices and improve their supports for students in those programs. So our Bureau advisors join Patent in that monitoring. Their role is specific to students with disabilities and that file review component, and working with IEP teams and leadership in AEDY programs and in the school district settings as well. There's a plethora of resources on the Patent website, quite a few webinars. I encourage you to go and look at those and just understand that we're all working through this process, and to date, we appreciate everybody's collaboration so far. So as I said at the start of the presentation that we would talk a little bit more about PASA. So I'd like to start with talking about the 1% threshold and just reminding the field that Pennsylvania continues to be on a 1% compliance plan imposed by the U.S. Department of Education. So we've been working with school districts that we identify them as they fall into 3 different tiers. We ask everybody to work through this process, whether it be a 1% justification survey that our team this year abbreviated to help schools and support them through that process. Those were due in December. And then, come that tier 2 piece, those are our schools that are reporting over 2% participation or higher in PASA. And then we work with them through a justification process. Just noting this year was unique as state assessments were canceled for 2020. So we modified some of that process. We continue to make training available for school districts to make sure that they understood how to work through that PASA eligibility process with the 6 criteria. The last piece, we unfortunately are still working with some schools that are identified as intensive needs review. And in that area, we're looking at some pretty clear data that is being indicated to us over 4% in certain N sizes. We have 8 LEAs we're working through right now through that process. And again, some of that is just training, helping teachers and IEP teams and parents understand the process. So we will continue that work as we move into I want to say 2021, but as we move into next year's assessments as well. This is a plan that Pennsylvania will still continue to be on, and that we will be reaching out and working with school districts. So to build upon PASA, we're going to switch gears a little bit here, and we're going to talk about test administration. PASA is the first spring administration to open their testing window. So our window will continue to be open on March 8th, as we have been sharing for the past several months. Because of the USDE and PDE announcement last week, we've received quite a few questions about that. So again, I can confirm that we will be extending our window. We just don't have a specific date quite yet. Just to remind the field that we moved to a new vendor this year with dynamic learning maps. We were previously with another vendor for about 20 years. So there's some new kinks and things that we have to work out with being in a new system. So those meetings are ongoing, and we hope to have an announcement soon about that window date. Some schools are saying, can we still move forward? Absolutely, you have that option to do so. Part of what PDE and the Bureau is looking to do is just maximizing all the flexibilities that we can to offer school districts. So if you'd like to move forward now, that's fine. And also understanding, keeping that health and safety plans in mind at your local school district. You may want to wait, you may be in a different virtual situation. We recognize that depending on the region you're in, things might look a little bit different. So we encourage you to reach out to our team. The other question that has been coming in is assessing in a pandemic, in that type of environment. So we're asking schools to reach out to our folks. We're having conversations about, we know some students use those manipulatives, right, for the PASA test. And, you know, maybe we want to think about using disposable cups, or maybe we want to put a protocol together for how we're going to wash those cups after each student's use. So those are the type of conversations that are happening right now as we consider assessing in a unique environment this year. PDE has come out very clearly, and we are not recommending that the assessment be administered remotely. We know the importance of that teacher to student connection, is particularly for the PASA. The other thing I'd like to highlight is we're still working with LEAs to ensure they're enrolled in the DLM system. Because it's a new vendor this year, there's just been a different process for uploading those students into the KITE portal. So if you see some emails from our team, we've been consistently reaching out to the assessment coordinators. Just know that we're trying to support you in that behind the scenes data management process. Just want to highlight again that IEP teams cannot opt out of state assessments. There are other processes for that are fleshed out in our resources in the links below that you'll see at the end of the PowerPoint. The last thing that I'd really like to emphasize, and I'm going to take an opportunity to emphasize two things. One, the patent website has outlined all the different procedures regarding DLM, the PASA assessment. Every email that has been sent out to the assessment coordinators are located on that webpage. All the prior videos and supports to the field are also located there. So that's a great, I like to call it a one-stop shop for PASA. And then actually starting this week, PASA now has live office hours. So on Mondays from 11 to 12 and Thursdays from 9 to 10, you can register and you can go on live with our assessment team with Lisa Hampy and Linda Lupp. They'll answer questions for you that you may have. And if those hours don't work for you, please just reach out. We're happy to set up a virtual Zoom meeting and walk you through anything that you need, whether it be the data management piece or the administration piece.
Okay, so one of the things we are messaging at any time we have an opportunity to speak to an audience is the tool of mediation. Early on, when Amy and I were touring the state last year, I remember we went to one of the special ed leadership meetings, and one of the directors asked what Amy and I were going to do with all of the increasing due process claims, and if we had a plan to help reduce them, and why don't people go to mediation anymore? And I thought that was a really valid question. And I asked him, do you recommend it to your families? And it was like an epiphany, because mediation is a tool for all of us. And there are many times when we are working with families and we can see the road isn't heading the way we may want it to go, and things might be getting contentious, that it goes a really long way to say, you know what, we're not agreeing right now. We're not seeing things the same way. I want to make sure you're aware of what your rights are, and I want to make sure you're aware of some resources that are available to all of us if things are not, if we're not able to resolve our differences of opinion together. So we're emphasizing this across the Commonwealth right now as a tool to allow collaboration to continue between the schools and the families. Mediation allows for a neutral party to help resolve the conflict. We have been working very collaboratively across the Commonwealth during the pandemic, but we recognize that there might be a time where the contentiousness increases when health and safety is not the priority. And we want to continue to support the families and the schools to work collaboratively on their differences. So reminding the field that mediation is a tool and a resource for you to use to offer to your families if you are heading a direction that is not agreeable to all parties. Just reach out to ODR and allow them to support the process. It resolves differences at the student level. It allows the decisions to still be made within the team. And it certainly is a less costly option than going to due process. As a result of everything I just said, the Special Education Advisory Panel advised the Bureau to permit attorneys to attend mediations beginning March 1st, 2021. The intent of this change was to encourage families who have already secured representation to use mediation as a tool prior to going to due process. Pennsylvania was one of 4 states across the nation that did not permit attorneys at mediation. So this is another effort to resolve differences as close to the student in a team fashion as possible. So this is a new change in Pennsylvania starting now. The mediators have gone through extensive training to support this new change. There was a patent pod that was released to highlight this information as well, if you look at the Patent Pod website. Okay, so now on to the BSE OVR Memorandum of Understanding. This was the year that we were required to revise the MOU between BSE and OVR. It's been a year-long process. We have highlighted and kept the field aware at any opportunity that we have, and it is complete. And we are at the rollout phase. We are very excited with the collaboration between the Bureau and OVR. And we will begin to roll out some resources to the field. In the near future, you will have access to a patent pod highlighting the main points of the MOU. There will be a series of webinars to help this MOU come to life for the field. Both OVR and BSE want to ensure that the MOU has a firm impact on the field and is a model of this increased partnership between our office to support the outcomes of students with disabilities. We look forward to additional trainings for the field for both the providers, meaning the LEA case managers and the OVR providers, as well as parents and students with disabilities. You can expect to see a glossary of terms of shared terms between the two entities, decision trees. You will begin to see how OVR services overlay on the transition plan. We intend to provide some guidance to know who pays for what, when in the process. But the most critical message that we want both OVR and the Bureau wants the field to hear, the families, the students, the educators, and the OVR case managers, is the increased collaboration between us to support the post-school outcomes of our students with disabilities, our shared commodity. Next slide. Significant disproportionality. We are in the 2nd year where LEAs needed to set aside 15% of their IDEA funds if they were flagged in one of the 3 areas as disproportionate: placement, discipline, or identification. They were required to set aside 15% of their funds in a proactive manner to address the area in which they were flagged. What is new this year is that in prior years, the students that were within the calculation were 5 to 21-year-olds. For this year, we were required to include 3 to 21-year-olds. So there could be LEAs with resident students that are in early intervention that are within their calculation. We have also added additional training options for the flagged school districts. They are not mandatory. They are equity training webinars that Nicole Holland-Sims has put together to help support the LEAs with some targeted technical assistance to address these areas of need. Finally, there is a data dashboard that is live for the flagged school districts that allows them to look at all of their data based on the different trends and ways that it can be conceptualized. This dashboard will be available for all LEAs in the very near future. This will allow all LEAs to see their significant disproportionality data, the trends that are within their school district, to allow them to adjust their practices if necessary prior to being flagged. Next slide. All right, so this, before I go on to the next slide, it was a lot of very dense information, and this was a very dense year for sure. We just want to remind you that this information is available on the BSE website, so please access that regularly. This session will be recorded, the PowerPoint will be posted, and never hesitate to reach out to your special education advisor. They are there to support you. They're there to support the families, and they're there to support the LEAs for anything and any questions that you may have. So don't hesitate to do that. Finally, before closing and getting to questions if we have time, we do want to highlight one upcoming statewide initiative that we are excited about. It's known that there are shortages in the field of special education in all areas of profession across the nation and in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania used to be a main source of educators for other states based on our exceptional higher education programs. But Pennsylvania itself, we are now experiencing our own shortages, of related service providers, paraprofessionals, educators, and leaders. As a result, we will be employing a multi-year initiative designed to increase the number of special education professionals in the field. It will be a 3-year initiative that we anticipate next year's conference being a main kickoff for all of this year's planning work. This is where you come in. We will be soliciting members of the field to participate in this year-long plan development. There will be committees representing all areas: special education leadership, related service providers, educators, paraprofessionals. We will have parents and students on each of the committees. And what we need to know from you, what are the barriers to the field? Why are people leaving the field? What supports can be put in place to make the field more attractive? What strategies can we do to attract more students before leaving high school to choose our field? And we need your mindset and your ideas to help us develop this plan. This is just a very brief foreshadow of a very exciting initiative that we will be starting next year. But the goal is this will be impactful for more than the initiative. We're looking for 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the line. How can we increase the qualified professionals within our field to support our students in this very awesome field in which we all work? So if you would like to be part of these committees, watch for some advertisements. They'll be coming out in the very near future around the summertime, where you'll have the opportunity to volunteer to participate on some of our committees. Okay, so that is our content for today. I am going to look at the chat box a little bit for some questions. Amy, do you want to go over these slides a second?
Sure, I just want to, there's about 5, I think, slides, and I don't want to make anyone dizzy, but I'm going to slowly click through so you can see it. As Carole shared, they will be available. Patton will post them, but again, it's just a nice way to look at topical areas and then connect directly to the resource.
So there's a couple questions around Act 26. The first question, does the form that is added to the IEP that asks the Act 26 questions have to be given to the parents when they receive the IEP or just discussed at the IEP meeting? Neither. Let me just remind the field that these are questions for OVR for the WIOA measurement of their indicators. So that's not part of the IEP. The intention is we're collecting the data off of the IEP. So if the student receives job training services, it should be reflected on the transition plan. If the student is going to participate in paid work experience, it should be reflected on the transition plan. It really is not part of the IEP process. It is just collecting the services off of the document. There was another question, will the competitive employment / OVR data be available for us to use in our programs? That is our goal. Our goal is that we are collecting valid and reliable data through these submissions, that we will be able to provide that to the LEAs for their own baseline and measurement so that they can measure their own outcomes. There will be some data dashboards created for this content from OVR, Employment First, and WIOA coming in the near future. But yes, our intention is to be able to share that data with the LEA so they are able to adjust their program if necessary. There's a question regarding what if the student was employed on their own without assistance of OVR school? So these data collection points are based on the services provided on the transition plan. So if the services are provided in order to offer FAPE, that is how the question should be responded to. If it is not based on services the students received, then you would not use that information to respond to the questions. Just a few more questions. I'm not sure what the timeline is regarding when this will be posted. Possibly Becky can respond to that when she comes back on. There is a comment regarding the initiative, positive comments about the initiatives. There's a question regarding, can parents join the committee? Yes, they may join the committee. We, in fact, need parents and people with disabilities to join our committee because their insight is critical to the plans moving forward.
Just a note about PASA, Carol, one of the questions came in. I do want to let everyone know that we recognize that there will be some situations where students may be difficult to test based on, you know, how parents feel about sending their students in or whatnot. And we will have a series of codes and ways for districts to bring that to light in the system. So that, look for that information to come out soon. But we expect everyone to just work through their health and safety plans and make every effort they can to collaborate and connect with families. That communication is just so important, whether it's about PASA or any other thing that we're navigating right now.
There is one more Act 26 question regarding my students have competitive integrative employment goal, but will achieve this through supported customized employment, but it is absolutely competitive integrative employment. Do we answer yes or no? That would be yes. If the students are in a competitive environment with people without disabilities making the same wage as people without disabilities, doing the same work as people without disabilities, that counts as competitive integrative employment. The supports to get there are part of the plan and the process. I'm just looking at the chat 1 second. Amy hit this. All right. All right, so that is our presentation for today. We really thank your attention and attending this volunteer session. We certainly wish we were in Hershey because now we would be adjourning to go network afterwards, and that opportunity is not there. But let's really hope that next year we are in person and can have that really important networking time. Amy, do you want to close out?
I do. Before we leave today, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for their hard work this year. It's been quite a year, and I know that you've heard that many times, but before we leave today, I would encourage you to take some time for yourself. Typically, when you go to a conference, you get some of that time. So if you take, just 10 minutes every day, just to yourself to do whatever it is that makes you feel good, I would encourage you to do that. And I know that's really hard to do right now because we're all running fast and furious and we care so much about the students we serve, but we need the best you. So I encourage you to take that time, and thank you again, and have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Carol and Amy. People really appreciate hearing that word from you. I was notified that a few folks may have missed a little bit of the introductory remarks right before you started. So I'm just going to repeat that this was a bonus session for information. So there is not a code for this session. This is just an extra freebie delight. And Carol, we will hope to network with you next year at Hershey Lodge. Thank you all so much for being a part of this first day. Hope to see you all again tomorrow as we move into day 2 of the conference. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Carol and Amy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.